Hey you guys, welcome to the Bones Collector. A couple of weeks ago in the mail I received a game that I backed on Kickstarter called CO2 Second Chance. CO2 is a game that was out a few years ago. You couldn't get a hold of it because I don't know if they didn't print a lot of them or what. But it's a game by Vital Lacerda. It's an excellent game because that's the only games I'm going to show you on Bones Collector. And I'm going to show you how it's played. So here we go. Okay, folks, this is CO2 Second Chance. This is a cooperative game, and this is laid out for 2 players. I couldn't put anything else on this table, so it's just for 2 players. 2-player setup, and we'll see how this goes. First of all, let's see. CO2 Second Chance lasts 4 decades, and this is the decade marker, 2010 to 2040. Each decade is separated into 5 phases: the operations, the income, environmental goals, energy supply, and the end of the decade. In the operations phase, we're marked by this oil barrel here, and this is just I think in the base game it'll probably have some kind of a wooden marker or something. I got the Kickstarter version, so I got this oil barrel. But each space represents a turn for each player. So this first space, each player will go. Second turn, each player will go. And in the third space, each player will go, and so forth until you finish that round. So that's how that is marked for operations. And then you keep going. Once you finish operations phase, you're going to go here for the income phase. This is the environmental phase. And then the energy supply phase. So that's how each round will be scored. So in the operations phase, you're going to make some choices. Each player has a board, and we have these handy dandy little cheater cardboard things that come with it, and you set those beside your player board, and they're really nice. They really help you out depending on whatever action you choose, and it goes into a nice detailed explanation about how to perform that action. So you're going to have a choice on your turn to do 1 main action, and you can do 3 executive actions. You can take each executive action only 1 time, and on your main action you have to choose 1 of 3, and you designate which one with this marker. So on your in your executive actions here, you get the choice to play a card, and when you do that, you're going to take one of your markers, put it here, simply marking that you're going to take that action. And to play a card, you're either going to choose to get one of these UN cards or to play one of your lobbyist cards. And these lobbyist cards, each player gets 5 to begin the game, and they each have something different on them. It's a benefit to you. So these cards, when you get a chance to play them. Don't wait and save them for later. Say, well, I think I'll take that later, because later the opportunity to play that may never come up. So when you get a chance to use one of these cards, it's my advice to do it. And on these cards, let's see if I can show you some of these. But you get different benefits. Let's see if I can turn this around here and focus on one of these cards. You get different benefits on these cards. If you build an infrastructure, a recycling plant, you're going to get a couple of tech cubes. If you build an infrastructure in South America, you get to move a scientist. If you take a benefit on the leftmost action space of a region, you get 2 tech cubes. So you get a main action in each one of these cards, and then down in the bottom right hand corner there's a secondary action or a minor action. So you have to choose one, either take the main action or the secondary action. The secondary actions are things like get $2, get a tech cube, move a scientist, get a CEP or a carbon emissions permit. So these are different benefits as you would expect from lobbyists, and that's what these cards do for you. So you want to use those whenever you can. So that's one of your player card functions of your executive actions on your player board. You can also choose to go to the CEP market set up by the UN. That's the carbon emissions permit market. And you can sell or buy a CEP, and you'll need those throughout the game. And then also you can choose to move a scientist, and to move a scientist is something you'll want to do as the game progresses, to go to the Energy Summit, to be able to present your knowledge to at the summit, show them how smart you are and what you've learned when it comes to reducing pollution, and you'll start to turn over these tiles right here once you finish these summit tiles. Now I'll tell you about those in a minute. So those are your executive actions, and you can do each one of them once. Then also on your turn you can choose one of these main actions. The first one is to propose a power plant. Now in this game what we're trying to do is reduce CO2 emissions, and that's the whole theme and the goal of this game. And it's called Second Chance because, you know, currently our power plants and other things that we do on the planet here are creating a lot of CO2 emissions, and we need to reduce those in order to bring the temperature of the atmosphere down. And that's what the 2015 Paris Summit was about, and all that stuff is in the rule book, and it's an amazing rule book and a lot of good information in it, and it's one of the great things about this game. But you're going to choose an executive action, and one of them is to propose a power plant. So you would choose one of these power plants, and you have several to choose from. This is a recycling plant, a hydro plant, a wind power plant, solar plant, and a forestation or green power plant. And the way you would choose one of those, well, I've already got one out here on the board, but in each region of the world, there's 6 regions, there's one of these tiles, and these are the agenda set up by the United Nations as to what type of power plant they would like in that region. So you have to look and see what they're asking for. So here we have a forestation plant, a hydro plant, and a recycling plant. On this tile in North America, we need a solar plant, a hydro plant, and a recycling plant. So those are, and those tiles, there's quite a few of them in the game box, and so they're going to come out differently every game to give you some a different game every time you play. So you'd look at those and you'd say, well, let's see, in Europe they need a forestation power plant, so we're going to take I'm going to take on my turn and I'm going to propose this power plant, and when I place it in that region, there's 3 spaces I can place it in. When I place it, I take the benefit that's on the board. Simple as that. So I'm going to place that power plant proposal right there, and it says I can take a scientist from here and add it to my player board, or I can move a scientist, and I'll talk more about that later. Or I could put it here, and I would take 2 tech cubes from the supply. And those tech cubes are used for many different things, but they're used for doing your builds and of power plants, and they're also used for meeting the requirements of these UN cards, which is very, very important because you have to turn over 7 of these in order to win the game. If you don't turn over all 7, or 7 out of these 10, you lose. So wherever you place this, you take that benefit. This benefit is to take money equal to the CEP of that region, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so you get $5. And in each instance, down at the bottom, it has a picture of one of these U-shaped proposals, and you're going to move up on that knowledge track. So this is a green forestation plant. So I'm going to put it here, and I'm going to take one of my markers, and over here on the forestation track, I'm going to put one of my yellow player markers, since I'm the yellow player, on 0. And it's very important that you move up on these knowledge tracks, because in order to build these power plants, the final step, you have to have the knowledge to do so. And I'll talk more about that as we go. So that's the proposal main action. When you're proposing an infrastructure, let's say this has already been put on the board, and I want to propose an infrastructure, I'll take and I'll pay one of these CEPs, and I will pay it to the bank, and I will move a scientist, if any. Now, if let's say I had placed this proposal, and one of my executive actions is to place a scientist, and you simply place it in that proposed power plant, and then if someone builds an infrastructure, you can take that scientist, and because it's a green power plant, I'm going to pick one of these summit tiles and that has a green power plant icon on it and place him there. And if we can place 2 more scientists on there as a team, the solar and wind, then we finish that tile, and we would turn over this solar, this wind, and this 2 times summit tile, and we could turn 3 of these over. And it's important to do that because you lose points for the ones at the end of the round that you don't have turned over. So I'll talk more about that later. But if I'm going to build this infrastructure, it tells me here on my player cheat sheet to pay a CEP, move a scientist, and I receive the benefits of this tile. So I flip it. Infrastructure, and also tells you on your player board when you're building infrastructure for whatever type you happen to be doing. So in green, this would say I'm going to pay a CEP and I'm going to receive 2 CEPs. So I'm going to receive 2 CEPs for doing this infrastructure, and this infrastructure would go right here on the tile like that. Okay, so that's simply how you build an infrastructure. And let's say that has already been done. So if my main action I choose to build, again, we're going to go on our player board to the forestation or green power plant and to do a level 1 build, and it says on your player board level 1 and level 2, and that's very important. Don't miss that. It's very easy to miss that, and I did the first time we played this game. But if you are building this power plant, a level 1, it tells you on your player board to pay $12, a CEP, 3 tech cubes, and then you're going to get 10 points. So you'd move this 10 points for building that power plant. Now when you build that power plant, we're going to take, let's see, this forestation plant and put it right on here, and then we'll move that as a build depending on which decade you're in, and we're on the first decade, so it's 2010, and the board says 2010 right there, so I'm going to put that built power plant right there. And that's really all 3 of your main actions and the way they work. Now once that power plant is built, you can take a control token, they call it, put it right here, take a cube, and because it's a forestation and mark on the tile there, I'm going to put this cube in this first space, and now I have control of that region. And what that means is these CEPs are mine to use if I want to use them. So, and those things really, as the game goes on, you really need those carbon emission permit tokens, because it costs you every time you build an infrastructure or build, you're going to have to spend those, and so they're very vital that you have those as the game goes on. So those are your executive actions and your main actions, and you're going to go again, you're going to take a turn and the other player is going to take 1 turn, and once that happens you're going to move this marker and you're going to go through those same things 1 more time. So let's see, and once everybody takes 4 turns, then you move to the income phase. Now the income phase works like this. Let's say these are all knowledge tracks, knowledge of the different types of power. We have hydro, solar, wind, green power or forestation, and recycling. So if the blue player, let's say, is here and I am here, and let's do some more work here, maybe something like this. Okay, so in this instance, when we're doing the income phase, you only add the person who is the highest on the knowledge track. So here we're at 2, here the highest token is at 4, even though it's a different player, and here the highest person is at 4, so that's 4, and 4 is 8, 9, 10. You only score the highest marker, so that gives us 10. So we can take that as a team in points on this track, or we can take it in money. So you have to discuss that as a team, and you know, it depends on how you feel about the game, but just a hint, we always took it in points, because at the end of the round when you start scoring, I'm telling you, it's very difficult to keep these carbon emissions from hitting 500. So you know, you're going to have to make that choice, but when we played it, we always took it in points instead of money. And money is very hard to come by in this game, so you just have to get it in different ways. But and I think towards the end of the game we maybe split it half and half, because at the beginning of the game it's very hard to stay alive, and as the game goes on and it becomes more familiar to you, I think in the last round we were able to take half in points and half in money, and to help ourselves out a little bit like that. But it's again, at the beginning of the game I would advise you to take that in points. Then after the income phase, we have environmental goals. Yes, okay, so environmental goals phase has to do with these tiles. And the ones on the board, it tells you in 2010, 20, 30, and 40 how many points you have to deduct for the ones you didn't turn over. So as I talked before, if you have some of these turned over, you don't have to subtract those from your point total. But if you are on 27 and you have all these tiles to count, and you take a point off for every one of them, so you start losing points rapidly for every one of these you didn't turn over. And it increases, the points that you have to subtract increases every decade. So it's very important that you pay attention to turning these things over. And you do that again by fulfilling these summit tiles and making sure that your scientists get up there and that you get these tiles turned over and turn over some of these. And then also having to do with these knowledge tracks, how far, that's what these purple ones are. And you have to be at the halfway point in order to turn these over. And once you're at the halfway point, you can see some of them have a little white line. That means you have to be clear to the end of the track to turn that one over. And then these green ones are the ones you have built power plants in. So if you build a hydro plant, you can turn over the hydro tile, a forestation plant, wind, and so forth. If you've built in South America, you can turn that over, and that's how that works. You just keep trying to get reach goals, do builds and the infrastructure's out here and get these tiles turned over so it doesn't count against you at the end of the round. And you're going to have some of them. You can't get them all turned over. Naturally, at the beginning of the game, you're going to have a lot of them. That's why it's only -1 point for each tile. You're not going to get too many of them turned over right away. But towards the end of the game, you really have to focus on these things because, by 2030, each one of them is 3 points. And if you end up with minus points at the end of the round, your team loses. If you end up over 500 points per million on your carbon output for the globe, your team loses. So those are things that you have to think about, and it's all tied together. So once you finish that, figuring up that at the end of the round, then you're going to do the energy supply phase. And in that phase, here's what happens. You go by region, and you look at the region, and you look at which decade you're in. We're in 2010. I've built a power plant in 2010 in this region. Very good. That's what the UN wanted. I got it done. There's no penalty. I go to the next region. 2010, we didn't get a power plant built. Guess what I have to do? I have to take a fossil fuel plant. Ouch! Ouch! And you draw these at random, and 40 is the highest, and that's what I just drew. So that really bites. When you get those, you'll groan. So I'm going to put that 40 on that 2010. And it works like that around the globe. In this region, if you have a power plant, you skip it. If you're in this region, if you have a power plant, you skip it. In this region, if you don't have one, you're going to have to put a fossil fuel plant there to satisfy the power needs of that region. And those are dirty and polluting, and it's going to count against you. And so when you draw those out, so there's 40, there's 20, there's 10, 20 for that one, and 10, 20, 30, 40 for that one. And then you would have some more out here, and you got to keep this carbon emissions marker from going to 500. You got to keep it below. And you can do that by spending points. So if you find yourself going up here, and it depends on what round, it's very, just like these minus points on these tiles here, you would also spend those kinds of points to take this down 10. In the decade of 2010, if you're on 13, you spend 1 point, you can go down 10 on the parts per million of CO2. If you're in 2030, it costs you 3 per point. 2040 costs you 4. So it gets expensive towards the end of the game to keep that marker off 500. So that is very important. And that is how the operations phase works. And well, I guess that's how most of this game works. That's really about all there is to it. And again, if you have when you're building these plants and you're trying to decide as a team, because this is a cooperative game, who's going to do the infrastructures, it's very important, because in order to get these UN cards, the same person has to have built the infrastructure on this card. So this is a recycling plant and a hydro plant. And the same person, in other words, if I wanted to pay the 2 tech cubes to take this card and satisfy the requirement of it doesn't matter who built it, it must have I must have 2 infrastructures in yellow in these, right? A recycling and a hydro. So I must have 2 yellow infrastructures on recycling and hydro in order to meet the requirements of this card. And then down at the bottom it has 2 handshaking, and that's the icon for the whole cooperative version of this game. When you see 2 hands shaking, you get 2 points. So that's what the cooperative rules all show, that icon of handshaking. So, and you have to have 7 of these fulfilled in order to win the game or to not lose the game, depending on how you look at it. Then also, I didn't mention, I think, that each player has 2 objective cards, and these are secret. You can't tell each other what these are, but you have to complete one of these in order to, again, win the game. If you didn't complete either one of these, if any player did not complete one of these cards, the team loses. So in this instance, this says you have to complete an infrastructure in 4 different regions of the world. This says you have to have a control, which is what I showed you here, in 4 different regions. And let's see what this player has. The blue player has to have 3 tech cubes left at the end of the... Am I showing these? 3 tech cubes left at the end of the game. And this card says you have to complete 2 builds in any one region of the world. So again, you have to look at those at the beginning of the game, and you have to ask yourself, which one. And sometimes you might not decide till later in the game which one you're doing. Sometimes the game will come to you, and sometimes you can force the issue. But you have to complete one of those cards in order to win this game. I didn't talk about the CEP market. Okay, so that's something I skipped. But I talked about it's one of your executive actions, but you can buy or sell in here. And this market, or this marker, tells you what the price of a CEP is. So if you're buying it, it's going to cost, if this marker's on 3, and that's where it starts for the game, it has a white circle around it. So if you want to buy one of those, it's going to cost you $3. If you want to sell one to the market, you get $3. So, and then it moves up and down according to buying and selling. So, and again, is on your player board. So let's see, did I cover everything? I think that's a brief overview of just about everything you have. So there's a lot to think about in this game, and it looks pretty intimidating, but hey, once you get to playing it, it's pretty easy to do. And check that out. That's the first player token. It's a gas mask. Yeah, that's pretty cool. All right. That's it. Okay, so what do I think of this game? Well, this game is incredible, and there's so many things I love about it. And I'm going to start with the basics, the rule book. First of all, the rule book has nice size font in it, so old guys and old gals like me and my friends can read the rule book, and sometimes that's very important to me. Every time it's important to me. But the rule book is laid out very good. It gives you examples of what moves to make, and as you saw me explaining it, in the rule book it tells you everything that you can do. And the Vital Lacerda is one of the top 5 board game designers in the business. And I'm going to do a video about my the top 5 designers, and he's one of them. So there's a spoiler alert. But I've got several games by him, and I love them all. I've got the Gallerist, Venus Deluxe, I've got Lisboa, and one of my favorite games of all time, Kanban, where you run an actual auto factory. So these real-world simulations, these Euro games, economic simulations, I just love them. And this theme is relevant. It's relevant to you and me, and it's current. And boy, I just can't say enough about that. It's a positive theme, and those are the kinds of board games I like. This game is crunchy, it's complex, you're going to have to think and really work hard to win. My wife Lori and I lost this game after the first round, the first time we played it, and once we got a kind of a feel for it, we were able to pull out a victory the second time, but it was very difficult, and some of the turns that we took, I mean, it took 15 minutes of discussion because you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing to build those infrastructures for one player to have the right ones in order to get those UN cards, because that is the meat of the game. Turning over tiles so they don't count against you at the end of the round, and like I showed you in the video, and to get those UN cards turned over. And it just takes a lot of coordination in your turns to do that. And that's the fun of it, and that's the thrill of it. Man, when we won that game, I couldn't, I couldn't come down for an hour, man. I was walking on cloud 9, because the game is just incredible. And Vital Lacerda is a genius. I hope I get to thank him someday for all the hundreds of hours I've spent playing his board games. And if you like a game like that, if you like to really have a lot of fun and really work out your mind, this game will really put you through the paces. And man, I can't say enough about it. It's a great game. CO2 Second Chance. Check it out.